what Beyondcadd does is it empowers like a roadway engineer to or transportation planner to do the road in conjunction with the bridge, because you can use the phasing system to do different sections along an alignment. So you might say, okay, from this section to this section is a bridge, and I can work with the bridge people to get a rough idea of what that's going to be, and I can build that and put that in very quickly.
Welcome to the BIM Heroes podcast. In this episode, we will be discussing the state of visualization of transportation and infrastructure projects. Welcome, Sam, to the podcast.
Thanks, Cody. It's great to be here.
We always start out at the beginning of this podcast doing just some generic introductions. So I thought we would go ahead and let you have an introduction here.
Sure. So I'm Sam Lytle. I am the founder of Beyondcadd Incorporated and the creator of our product, Beyond Typicals. I'm from the Las Vegas area, and I am a licensed civil engineer, though most of my experience has been in 3D visualization within transportation.
And just discuss a little bit about what Beyondcadd is, the company that you made, and then go a little bit into Beyond Typicals and why it was created.
Sure. So if we rewind back a little bit, I started my career with Nevada Department of Transportation, and it wasn't long before doing that I realized that I wasn't cut out for civil engineering, but I did at the time fall in love with 3D visualization and realized that I could kind of utilize my education and experience and focus it toward this visualization. And so in 2014, I started a company called CivilFX, and we provided 3D visualization services for transportation and infrastructure, a lot of public outreach, a lot of 3D renderings, animations that they would do at public meetings or the news. I built that team up to 10 full-time employees, and I sold that company in 2020 to Parametrics, an engineering firm out of the Northwest. And at that point, I started Beyondcadd with the goal of making better visualization tools to put them in the hands of the actual engineers and planners doing the work, so that they could do their own 3D visualization. And some of the team that I have, I brought over from the old CivilFX team. And so for about 3.5 years, we've been making these tools, primarily Beyond Typicals, which is our current product.
And what is the purpose of Beyond Typicals in this industry now?
Sure. And just a little background on that. So when I first started Beyondcadd, we had a product called Beyondcadd that we spent almost 2 years making. And it was supposed to be, if anyone's familiar with Lumion or Twinmotion, it was supposed to be that for transportation, with like a advanced traffic system and a lot of things that I'd learned at CivilFX. We wanted to make that tool where people could just visualize their own projects. And so we built that, we launched it, and there was this planned feature, which was just a 3D typical section creator, because at CivilFX, we had clients that wanted that. And so I was like, well, what if clients could just make their own? So we were building this, and as it got farther along, I was like, oh, wow, this could be its own product. Like, it doesn't have to be part of Beyondcadd. So we split it out, and we have Beyondcadd, our main flagship product, and then we have Beyond Typicals, this kind of afterthought. And it quickly became apparent that Beyondcadd was having a tough time gaining traction in the market. People were struggling to understand why they needed it, or the ones that used it had a tough time with it. It just needed more time as far as development. Whereas this afterthought, Beyond Typicals, our customers loved it. They were just like, we use this thing every day. This is what we've been looking for a long time. And so for a while we sold them together, but at some point it didn't make sense to keep trying to sell and support Beyondcadd. And so we discontinued that product, and we just doubled down on Beyond Typicals. And so now we're about 2 years into Beyond Typicals, and very high level, there are online tools like StreetMix or StreetPlan, where you can drag and drop sections, like 2D sections. It's that, but in 3D. We use Unreal Engine. There are over 100 pre-made sections that you can just build out your road section. Usually you'll build out like an existing section, and then you can use phasing to build out phases or alternatives. There are over 400 3D assets that you can apply to add realism, but it's just a typical section extended in 3D. And it's really easy to design and plan and visualize roads and streets and bridges. And again, it wasn't the goal to build this thing. It just kind of happened. And our customers have found a lot of success being able to do things that there's just nothing else out there like it. And so we're happy with where that is and where it's going.
Which leads me into a great next question. Where were we with the state of visualizing transportation and infrastructure projects? Where are we now and where are we going?
Yeah, well, one benchmark that I would look at is architecture, because they are ahead of us. They hate it when I say this, but their projects are just easier to visualize. They're usually dealing with a lot of flat surfaces and straight edges in a way that we just don't have the luxury of doing in transportation and infrastructure. And their projects are typically smaller as well. In transportation, you may have a corridor that's miles long with bridges and intersections and all that stuff. So architecture, they started doing interactive visualization in the early 2000s. Our industry started doing it probably 10 or 15 years later. That's one thing that we found success with Civil FX. We would just take all the 3D files, like roadway files and striping files, and turn them into a video game and let customers fly around them in real time. And so the graphics weren't that great, but the things were starting to get interactive. That's where we were. Before that, it was just rendering with like a render farm. So like if you wanted an image or a video rendered, you needed to send it to a render farm, wait a week or two, and then you would get your image or video. Then it got to the interactive stuff, maybe 10 years ago. And now it's just more and more interactive and more realistic as game engines like Unity, Unreal Engine, and even like Twinmotion and Lumion have just gotten more and more realistic. And then where it's going, I hope where it's going, and I've been saying this for a while, is, you talk about BIM, we see something like Revit, and Revit is just, to me, the gold standard of where software should be in design, because you're putting everything in one place, all of the components, all of the quantities, you can do, prices of different objects, you can do texturing, you can do everything in one spot. And then from there, you can create plans, you can create quantity takeoffs, you can do visualization, either in-house or send it out to something like Lumion. And nothing like that exists in civil infrastructure transportation at all. I mean, you have civil 3D, but in civil 3D, you're not going to see textures typically, or you're not going to see like highway signs, you're not going to see 3D striping. All of those things are disparate. The only way they get combined is in a plan set that's usually like a PDF or a printed piece of paper. And so I've just been waiting for the day when one of the big players just makes that Revit for infrastructure, because then there will be so many efficiencies. Everyone will be working in the same space, and all of those things that you see from Revit, the plans, the quantity takeoffs, the scheduling, the visualization will all be done. I don't know if there are attempts, but there have been products that kind of look like they're going that direction. InfraWorks has shown some promise at combining some of that stuff. Navisworks, I'm running to the end of the list. It's a short list, but that's my hope, that where this is going is we someday get the Revit for civil.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the challenges with certain companies, is that they try to focus on a lot of different things. And I think one of the challenges inherently in that is just having teams big enough to devote resources to that particular area of design. And I think that's right on the point of, we have an industry that is heavily focused on the model of a building. But for years, it's not a building that we're just putting in a model. It's a model that is in reality. And I don't think yet, and it's starting to show promise, that we're starting to mold those two worlds together as it is in real life. And I think that's the big focus, is looking at cities. So for urban planning discussions, and how that is going to fundamentally impact the way that we look at visualizing projects. And I think it's a great question, is what are some of the inherent challenges that you have seen with urban planning design, and how do you feel that Beyond Typicals can help that world?
Sure. Well, with urban planning design, and one thing I want to point out too, my background is in roadway design. That's what I did at Nevada DOT. I spent a year with Kinley Horn as well. And even when I was at Civil FX, we focused on that. And so I wasn't even really aware of the urban planning industry, even though it's so related, until recently. I mean, I'm from the Southwest, and we don't typically have, tight corridors with buildings, tall buildings on either side, like you might have in Chicago or New York or San Francisco or DC. And so when I built Beyond Typicals, I started getting a lot of feedback from these urban planners and transportation planners, and they were getting super excited about this. And that was really interesting to me. And we started implementing their feedback, and I think that's where it started taking off. So they're facing a lot of unique challenges because a lot of times their space is confined. They are, they might have like a right of way of 80 feet, and they have no option to move that because there are tall buildings on either side. I mean, in Roadway, like you may have to do some right of way acquisitions, but typically you probably, or you may have to like take someone's property, but you probably can get some more width if you need it. But they don't have those kind of options, and so they're really confined with that. They have to communicate it to a lot more people because there's a lot more people on those corridors, and then there are a lot more aging infrastructure as far as like underground utilities and past projects, integrations, ADA. There's just all of these things that are a much higher density than what I was dealing with Roadway. And so to have a tool like Beyond Typicals, it's so helpful for them because in the past, they would either have to use something like a spreadsheet or StreetMix that was really hard to communicate it, or they would have to hire it out to a company like Civil FX that would create these renderings. But that's as good as the quality may be, it's not going to be dynamic. And so now they have Beyond Typicals where they can have a meeting internally, they can have a meeting with stakeholders, they can have a meeting with the public, and not only show the visuals, but they can change things. They can say, oh, well, what if we switch the parking in the bike lane like this, and you just move the section over? Or what if we changed all the lanes from 11 feet down to 10.5 so that we could get a grassy median in here and get some more green space? And you can do all that stuff interactively. And so it empowers them to communicate and design in a way that has not been previously possible. And that's, because the technology has advanced to that point. And so those are the challenges that they're facing. And that's how Beyond Typicals can kind of interact with those in a way that had not been previously possible.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a good point. One of the things that we always look at in buildings is circulation. So, the biggest circulation of different things is out in the street side of things. And it's always been really tricky to discuss with urban planning to make sure that the city is growing the proper way and making sure that as the buildings are being built around it, the proper circulation is being designed to do that. And I think one of the things that goes misunderstood about the civil engineering side is that it's so vast. Like there's a lot of us that design buildings, there's a lot of us that design roads. But one of the things I think that goes unnoticed is that a lot of people don't focus on roads because I guess they're not sexy enough, but they're one of the most important parts of infrastructure. And it leads to an inherent question is how do you make within Beyond Typical street design better? Trying to visualize that.
Yeah, again, I think it goes to the interactivity. And one of the challenges that we notice with Beyondcadd is as inefficient as the process may be of designing a road. I mean, even before that, like surveying and then designing within those constraints and then creating plans and then constructing. It may be inefficient, but it works. And so here we were like trying to squeeze in this other step, which is 3D visualization. And most of these guys are just like, wait, like, why do we need to do this? We can build a road without visualization. Why are you trying to do this thing? And we don't have money in the budget to outsource that, either to an internal visualization team or outsource it to an external one. And so with Beyond Typicals, none of that stuff really matters as much because it's doing some of the design and planning itself. It's high level, like you're not going to produce plans from it, but you can make design decisions very quickly. And then B, you're putting the power of the visualization in the hands of the actual engineer. And so those things combined make it so that now they have a tool that's not trying to shove some other step in it. It naturally fits in the process without that much additional cost because it's easy to use, it's efficient. And so I think that's why it's fitting in a way and solving problems that like a more robust solution it can't right now. And I think there will be a day when the industry is ready for you know, a Beyondcadd or a Lumion for transportation, but it's not there yet. And I think, I mean, if we put Beyond Typicals on one end of the spectrum and we put something like Beyondcadd on the other end of the spectrum, I think rather than go from Beyondcadd and make things simpler, we could go from Beyond Typicals and then just do a little bit more and more complex things. Like a lot of our customers ask, where is Beyond intersections? They want to be able to, you know, just drop in a roundabout and have it magically fit in the way it should, and the traffic's moving and it looks great. And so we want to build that and we hope to build that, but that's going to be much more complex. But I think we can start pushing towards more and more complexity from Beyond Typicals rather than like starting at the most complex thing and trying to make the industry adopt it and go backward.
Yeah, and I think that's what you're doing now, right, with the sections. Because one of the things that, you know, talking to different groups that do roadway work or they are designers of roads is really understanding what that section is. And you're giving that section like they always know, but then turning that back into a three-dimensional world that we live in so that they can get a good idea of what that section might look like. Talk about how somebody that's an engineer or let's say a construction a firm that does road work, how would they go about using it for that purpose?
Yeah, I think one thing that they need to learn quickly is it's probably not going to be a one-to-one match of either the existing condition or the proposed condition. You know, there is kind of a leap in imagination that needs to happen. And Beyond Tables makes that easier because it is fairly photorealistic. And we have the ability to import things. Like let's say that you have a custom light pole, like you can import that object and then place it so that you don't have to use one of our library assets. But using these sections, they can just start building things out very quickly, communicate them, and then it's not just a static project. It can be an active project with multiple phases, and you can show, okay, this is the existing condition, and then you can click through and show all the way to final. And that might include traffic closures, MOT. It might include underground work. You can show utilities in construction equipment, you can show bridges. And so it just gives the end user, whether that be an engineer or even a contractor, the ability to not only communicate the project, but communicate how they're going to get there from where they are today. And it's dynamic enough that they can get feedback from other people to get there from the beginning to the end.
Yeah, and one of the pieces that we also look at that could be interesting in this particular aspect of Beyondcadd is we always try to look at a road originally and see how much traffic flow is on it to redesign that particular area or brand new roads per se. What is some of the concepts you could see in the future of maybe taking some of that analysis that does counts and it, you know, gives options like this is the different types of options depending upon what we're seeing with the counts of cars.
Yeah, and we have some customers ask us about those kind of features as well. I mean, right now, I think some people confuse visualization and simulation, and they'll see something like vSim and they'll think that's where we're going. And we're not there right now. Right now, we're just focused on communication. Like the output isn't going to be like, this is how wide your road needs to be. The output's going to be a pretty picture or a video that you can use for your PowerPoint. That said, you know, if we were able to tap into that, like let's say that you could import an FZP file from a vSim project, or maybe even someday you could tap into real-time data, then those lane widths or the number of lanes could auto adjust. You know, like maybe there's 3 lanes, but then it says like, no, we have the counts and we know the 3 lanes isn't going to be enough. And so it just automatically pushes out to 4 lanes. And I think, you know, we've seen AI explode over the last year or two. And I think there are a lot of opportunities within AI as well, where it's not just traffic counts, but imagine that we have an AI trained on the best design criteria for urban planning. And when you build out your existing section, and maybe someday even that's AI, we just put a pin on a map and it just says, oh, we know that this is Kennedy Avenue and it's going to look just like this. So you do that, and then you just click a button that says AI analysis. It just takes what's there. And then it says, based on the best practices, based on the constraints you're facing, based on the future growth, because we have the projected traffic counts, here are 5 different alternatives that would work well for you. I don't want all the planners out there to get too scared, because this is going to hopefully just enhance their jobs. But then you can say, wow, look at this. I'm pretty sure all of these, they're at least a good start in a direction. This one has maybe a bike option. This one is more of a bus or a tram. This one has more sidewalk with walking space. But I'm pretty confident that all 5 of these alternatives that were generated by AI now are a good start for a project here. So yes, let's tap into the traffic count data or the projected traffic count data. But I think even with AI, there are more opportunities to really just put this stuff on steroids, really take it to the next level.
Do you see the product also looking at like smart cities where different design firms, different planners, different landscape architects, different general contractors that put this work in place and visualize it, but then as a city try to tie all those together into one big plan to run their cities?
Yeah, I think with Beyond Typicals, it's probably never going to get that far because it's just serving a different purpose. But back to my point of like, where is the Revit for civil? I think that's what that needs to do. Like, I think we need, when you talk about digital twins or smart cities, like there needs to be a repository that includes, the roadway, the civil, the transportation, the underground utilities. But then also, like, what if we could coordinate with all of the architects and get their Revit files or their SketchUp files or whatever, and be able to drop all of those in. And so we're looking at a holistic approach of a chunk of the city, and not just like, everyone's just looking at that chunk through their lens. It's like, no, we can all get together and we're looking at something together. And again, I'm somewhat jealous of the architecture industry because I think their tools are just a little bit more advanced in that way, where you can, like, let's take a Revit model. You can do it in a way where you have the architect, you've got your MEP, you've got your structural engineer, and they can all be working toward the same model in a way that we just can't at this point.
What do you feel like the biggest challenges that you're hearing from your clients that they're having challenges with the design of streets and this solves?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest challenge that we are tackling is communication. And communication is super difficult. And I've spent the last 10 plus years involved in this. I mean, if you've ever gone to a public meeting, it's terrifying. I mean, the project manager is getting up there and they may be telling the people, we're going to take your house, or one of these alternatives is going to take your house, or we're going to change access to your work. I mean, they're not always the bearer of good news. I've been to a lot of public meetings and it's terrifying. And so now if we can just give them tools to communicate and just say, look, this may affect your life, but look what it's going to do. Look at the aesthetics that we're going to bring in, and we're going to add value to your property value to all the homes in the area. And look, yes, maybe construction will be a nightmare, but look at how much better your access is going to be when this is done. And I can flip a switch or click a button and you can see how that is. And so there are many challenges in infrastructure. There are many challenges in engineering and architecture, but the one that we have been tackling is communication is difficult. Let's make it easier. Let's make it so we can get on the same page. And we've had customers that say, man, this used to take us months to like go back and forth with the city or with the other stakeholders, with the community. But now, like, we can get in a room and we can just be moving around sections, changing widths, changing heights, all in real time. And in one meeting, we could do what used to take us months. So that's the problem that for whatever reason, I've kind of dedicated my career toward. And that's the problem that I think Beyond Typicals and hopefully future iterations of it and hopefully future products are going to continue to make easier. Like, let's just make communication as easy as possible. And there will be so many efficiencies, time and cost savings as a result.
Yeah, and I think just taking that concept from the streets to, let's say, large infrastructure like highways or bridges. What are some of the things that you're starting to see as we work outside of the urban environment? What are some of the inherent challenges when designing a bridge or visualizing highways?
Yeah, and when we added bridge features, I think it was, I don't even remember if it was a request from a customer or just one of the things that we thought we could do and we wanted to add. So we added it, and we've had customers use it because we're able to work with them and do customer support. But I don't think bridge designers really use Beyond Typicals because they have a lot of their own tools, and they're not going to want to just like drag and drop these sections and do stuff. They have their own workflow for that. That said, what Beyond Typicals does is it empowers like a roadway engineer to kind of transportation planner to do the road in conjunction with the bridge, because you can use the phasing system to do different sections along an alignment. So you might say, okay, from this section to this section is 3 lanes in each direction. This section to this section is 2 lanes in each direction. And then this section to this section is a bridge. And I can work with the bridge people to get a rough idea of what that's going to be. And I can build that and put that in very quickly. And so it's not, again, going to be generating plans, but what we're trying to do is we're empowering people working on those less urban environments to be involved in more aspects of the project and be able to design and coordinate and communicate that in a way that was previously very difficult.
Yeah, and when we're looking at, let's say, a bridge, does it have the ability to take that bridge and be able to see traffic flows across the bridge or underneath the bridge? Just wanted to dive into that.
Yeah, it does. I mean, you can put traffic in Beyond Typicals for any lane, whether it's a bridge or non-bridge scenario. You can control the volume. It's not scientific. It's just basically like 1 to 100. How much cars do we want to show, like bumper to bumper traffic, or do we want to show one vehicle at a time? Again, it's what do you want to show, and you can show a lot of traffic, no traffic at all. As far as traffic going under bridges, like one thing that we don't have yet that we do have on our roadmap is like you can kind of stack sections on top of each other to display them for like printouts and stuff. It's called layout mode. But like to show a road going under a bridge, sometimes you need to like rotate the bridge so that they're like perpendicular to each other, and we're not yet able to do that. So cars really can't go underneath. But what you do is you basically build out your bridge. What's the top called? Not the super. Is it superstructure? The ones with you just build the lanes out on top,
right?
And then you start adding substructure elements like girders or pier caps, and then you just start building it out underneath. But I just want to emphasize, like all of this is visual. Like there are, I know with something like InfraWorks, there are more and more structural tools, and then you can link that with like something that will actually do structural analysis or do load analysis or dynamic or whatever. SAP 2000. I know there are all these tools available to do that. Like we don't do any of that. All of our stuff is previous to that. It's like high level. What's this going to look like? How is this going to work? Yeah, how is this going to work in conjunction with the adjacent road sections? And how can we use this to communicate with our internal team and with potentially external stakeholders in the public?
And then when we're looking at highway design, a lot of people try to tie that in with street design just because of its inherent nature. But highway design, one of the projects that is going on in our state, it's one of the largest infrastructure projects we've had in a long, long time here in North Carolina. We're building the extension to the 540 belt line, which connects basically the whole area together again after they did the 40 expansion years ago. One of the things that I think with highway design that's always so tricky is to communicate that out to the public of how that is going to fundamentally impact the way that you get from place to place. So you don't have to go through the city, you just use the belt line to do so. Talk to us a little bit about how that would be used in this case.
Yeah, again, you could use the phasing section to show different typical sections along the alignment. And that's what you would do here, because an alignment that long is going to change a lot. Like there's going to be all sorts of changes within the roadway, but then also like how it interfaces with the adjacent right of way. Like are we having fences next to it? Are we having farmland? Are we having swampland? Are we having water? Are we having buildings? Whatever. And you can show all of that with the changing alignment along the way. Safety is a huge part of these projects, and that's something that we can show as well. Do we have guardrail, barrier rail, cable barrier rail? We can show all of that in. You can show MOT. So I think Beyond it is used on projects like that, and it should be. But I think there is a line that can be drawn when a project gets complex enough and far enough in the life cycle, especially for a big project. You may just want to bring on like shout out to my old team, Civil FX, they're still doing stuff with parametrics. At that point, you may just want to bring on a full thing, because showing sections has its place, and we found a really good place in our market. But sometimes you want to see the entire road. You want to see these interchanges. You want to see how they interact with the side streets, the surface roads, and all of that in a more holistic way that we just can't do with Beyond Typicals. So I guess that's my pitch. Like, use Beyond Typicals as much as you can, especially early on. Let's make decisions. Let's use it to communicate to the public. But if it's a big enough project, it's far enough along, you have some 3D geometry files that you can use for 3D modeling. Like, maybe we have it in our budget to spend 100 grand and make a really good visualization, either interactive model or some videos that we can use so that people get this from like the whole picture.
Yeah, which leads into another great conversation that you brought up, is the construction phasing and the inherent challenges of construction. Whether it's for roads or for buildings, we have to have the ability to do construction phasing. We have to do traffic management plans. Talk to us about the inherent challenges of that, and then what Beyond Typical can do to help us as GCs or subs put that in place the right way.
Yeah, I remember early in my career, you go through school and you learn these equations, you learn how to like calculate the loads and all this thing. And it's all kind of neat project problems, they don't want to get too complex. But then I got into the real world, and like I was working with bridge designers, and like their problem is so much more complex than just making a bridge. Like, they have to make a bridge stand up for 50 years, but then they have to make it so that it stands up in every phase of construction. Like in that changes. They might be dealing with cantilevers during construction. Like if it's an concrete arch bridge or something, you might be cantilevering from either side, and so they got to make sure that it's going to stay up during every phase of the construction, and with dynamic loads of people building the thing. And so as I moved further in my career, I realized this dynamic nature of these projects is not just like for bridges, but it's for things like traffic maintenance as well. Like, you have to build a project that will work well when it's completed. You want traffic to flow smoothly and to have limited backups and all of that stuff. But like, what happens for the 2 years while the project's being built? You have to think about that. And there are people that are, really good. That's their entire job at MOT, maintenance of traffic. And so them having tools that are somewhat visual, where they can say, yes, we're gonna be changing traffic, but we're going to be moving traffic over to the median for this portion of the project. Then you can kind of give peace of mind to the public, or stakeholders, whoever you're talking to, that it's going to work. I'm going to be able to still get around the city. I'm still going to be able to get around the project. But and it's not just one traffic control phase. There may be many of them. And you can do a lot of that with Beyond Typicals. Again, Beyond Typicals it's not going to solve every problem. It's not going to do everything. It's a very specific tool. And at some point, you may need to reach out to a 3D visualization team. And we've done that. Civil FX, we would do these huge system-to-system interchanges, not just the final construction, but we would do all the phasing. We would put the cones, we would change the traffic. And so having these tools to communicate is just going to save a lot of time, a lot of money. And one thing you want to do, like, I was on Project Neon in Las Vegas, which I think to date is still the biggest public works project in Nevada's history. But like, what they would do is they would use our renders, and then they would put them on the news, and they would brand it like Carmageddon or like some scary name, because their goal was they wanted to scare people away from the project. Like, they don't want everyone to be coming in and making construction harder, making backups, making their life harder. And so they would use these tools to communicate like, hey, if you can avoid this area, just avoid it. Just go around. We'll be open in a couple of weeks. This is just going to be a temporary thing. We got to get this thing done. But having these tools is just so useful to communicate whatever it is you're trying to communicate, to make these projects done faster, safer, under budget, and hopefully with the limited impact on the public.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest challenge with us in construction, is we're trying to limit that, because it's not just for the aspect of constructing that building, but it's the safety aspect of trying to keep people safe while we're in the process of trying to build the road, bridge, or building. And taking that into cities can be really, really tricky because we're having to create traffic management plans. And a lot of times, a lot of traffic management plans are 2D, and some people could understand them if they come from the background that you and me come from in civil engineering, but a lot of people inherently don't. And when they're coming to work every day and they're coming to the city and they're trying to work through the city, it's really challenging. They see signs up, they have to follow, they're trying to work their way around the site. And I think it's also imperative for our group not only to visualize and communicate that to them to for that period of time that we're working on it, but also to communicate to us, are we doing this effectively and efficiently while we're building the project? So that when we get to the end of the construction process, we're taking this from a state of construction that is inherently unsafe at times to the final product that's what they're going to use every single day, and trying to transition them to that is inherently one of the things that we're trying to do, which leads me to the safety aspect of construction phasing of projects. What are some of the things that you've seen that have worked really well with trying to communicate safety?
Yeah, and safety, it impacts the traveling public, but it also impacts the workers out there. As mad as people get about construction or having to commute through traffic cones, like this is these people's jobs. They have to go to work and they have to feel safe. And there are so many aspects of that, whether it be choosing a concrete barrier type scenario versus traffic cones where they're more protected, or having good construction staging areas where they can be away from the traffic. And so all of those things have to be kept in mind when you're talking about these projects, the phasing, the final condition, and making sure people are as safe as possible. I mean, that should always be the priority. And I think that's become a priority now in a way it wasn't 30 years ago, but we've got to keep our people safe. I mean, heaven knows enough people die on roads as it is. We don't need to exacerbate that problem by making unnecessary deaths, again, either to the traveling public or to the construction crews through these projects. And so, with something like Beyond Typicals, we can make it so contractors can better coordinate what that's going to look like. We have so many 3D assets, whether it be, a variety of barriers or barricades or traffic cones, traffic barrels, even signage. Now, with our new version 3 coming out soon, we're going to have changeable message signs and arrow boards. And we want all of those in there so that they can communicate what that project is going to do during that time. And hopefully they're using it to communicate internally to make truly the best design, the best phasing possible. But then also, hopefully they can use that externally with their public outreach on the project website or on the news or whatever to say, look, this is the way it's going to happen. We want you to understand it as much as possible so that you're not confused when you're driving, or maybe you can avoid this area altogether. And then hopefully lives will be saved as a result.
Yeah, and I think the great part of that too is the simple drag and drop. You've got a really robust library that you're continuing to develop out, and just being able to bring that in and use that effectively. Because I think a lot of times, there's a lot of challenges bringing in different assets that might not fit within a program, or they're visually they don't look right. So I think that's one of the things that you've done really well is being able to pull that asset library together and use it.
Thank you.
The next piece of this is then in one of the things that I think is one of the biggest challenges in our industry. And one of the things that probably has gone the most unnoticed, but there is a lot of inherent risk behind it. And also there is a lot of new technologies that are trying to address it. And that is around utility coordination. Whether it is existing utilities, whether it's new utilities being put in place, what are some of the inherent challenges that you've seen in the industry? And then what is Beyond Typicals trying to do to try to solve that?
Yeah, well, I guess I should point out, I don't have a ton of experience with utilities, and a lot of the work that we've done has been in conjunction with customers that have more experience than I do, and we've been able to integrate some of those tools. So, utilities are the lifeblood of so many parts of our infrastructure and make our world work, whether it be water or sewer or telecommunications or gas, whatever it is, they're just so important. And a lot of times they go unnoticed by the public, even though you're driving over them all the time. So with Beyond Typicals, you're able to assign utilities to sections. Sometimes you can even bring in your own independent utilities. And then that way you can communicate those with, either the existing or the proposed or the phasing. We have trench sections, and those are open trench, they are closed trench, they are covered trench. We have a bunch of different types, because when you are working on a trench, again, you have to think about, like, what is the MOT, the maintenance of traffic, going to look like? What is the shoring situation going to look like? I want my workers to be safe when I'm in there. And so we've, again, worked with people that do a lot of this stuff to make sure that they can communicate. Yes, we may be trenching it. We have, construction equipment that can show that, but also what's going to happen while the workers are away. Is it shored? Is it covered? What's going on there? And because of that, we've been able to add this dimension of utilities to projects, which is critical, which often goes unnoticed, especially in like the high level, section, like online 2D section creators. And so that's been super beneficial to help them. I mean, we have work to do. Like, for example, you can change the color of the liquid. Like if you want to show water blue, sewer green, you can do that, but you can't change the color of the pipe. You can't change the depth of the liquid. That's something we want to do. You can change the rotation. So if something's not perfectly perpendicular, you can do that now. But that's one of those things that we added, a year or two ago, and it's just going to get better and better and more complex. And hopefully someday we'll be able to do more things with like intersecting utilities, 90-degree turns, manholes, all that stuff.
Yeah, and I think the other piece of that to maybe take a look at is like the existing side of things, like trying to bring in some of that data and trying to merge that together. Because I know a lot of cities right now, when it comes to GIS information, it's still, very incomplete. And I think that's one of the goals in the next 20 years is to develop utility networks for different areas.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we could really do to improve that is make integrations with design software. So like if you're able to tap into Civil 3D or MicroStation or InfraWorks or whatever it is, then you can pull that data in so that, right now you can build sections out very quickly. You can do the utilities very quickly, but you have to just kind of eyeball it, or you have to know what the depth is and type that in. But to someday be able to just say, this is the section, and then pull in the utility data, that's definitely something that we would be interested in. It might be way out.
Yeah, which I think is also one of the inherent, really neat characteristics of the tool is the ability to tag different things. Because when you're looking at, visualization of any sort, you still have to have this inherent nature of what you're looking at, but being able to tag different things in different ways, like you said earlier, the sign that can change in the future. I think that's one of the key aspects of the program that works a lot to help communicate that vision.
Yeah, and we've done like the widths of the sections, like we have what's called auto labels. That like if you change the width from 12 to 10, it's automatically going to change the label as well. And then you can add custom labels, but I think something we can do is more smart labels. Like if you place a utility, it should already be able to click on it, add label, it knows what the diameter is, and then just pop up the label. So yeah, labeling is possible, but we have a lot of work to do to just be able to click things. And then another thing too is our labels are kind of dumb as far as like we don't have measuring systems. Like maybe we want to show the distance between utilities. Like that's not super easy to do. So there are, yes, labeling is possible. We have a lot of work to do to make it just a lot smarter and more useful.
Which leads to a kind of a different topic, but a little bit on the same lines. 4D has always been a challenge in the world. I think it's inherently because of how hard it is to set up on the front end. What are some of the things on the infrastructure side of 4D that you're working on with Beyondcadd?
Yeah, and I think by 4D, you're talking about just the entire timeline of the project rather than just having it be a static thing. I mean, with our phasing system, you're able to do some of that stuff already. And that's super useful because that's something that a lot of people that don't do projects all the time think about. Is just how it's a living, breathing thing. I mean, it's not just existing phasing proposed, but it's also maintenance. Like who's going to maintain this? How's it going to be maintained? What's snow removal look like? What's the maybe debris removal of pipes. And so there is this entire life cycle, and you can manage that using our phasing system. Again, there's work to be done. And with version 3, one thing that we're doing is animated construction equipment, which just makes it more alive. Obviously we already have cars moving, people moving, and so the time element is there. And another thing we could do to improve is just blend the phases together. Like right now, it's just like, if you go from 3 lanes to 4 lanes, like it just does that. But hopefully someday we can do some tapering, some blending of some of those, so that we can have a true like living life cycle of a project. And hopefully we're teaching stakeholders and the public to think that way, to think like, this isn't just what's outside my front door right now or what's going to be in the future, but like we got to think about maintenance. We got to think about construction staging and phasing and MOT and all of these other aspects that are part of these complex projects.
Yeah, and I also think that's what's so unique about that too is different materials and how they are displayed. I think sometimes, a lot of times when you're looking at different phasing or 4D, it can be a little clunky. Just discuss a little bit about different materials that they can choose from and how easy it is to change that out.
Yeah, and that's something that you learn when you're involved in these projects. Like, let's say it's just a simple utility maintenance project. You want to show there's a utility here. We're going to close down traffic to get our construction equipment in. We're going to access the utility. We're going to fix it or replace it, and then we're going to close it back up. When you're involved in these projects, you realize that when it's done, the asphalt above that utility is probably going to look different than the asphalt adjacent to it, because it's going to be freshly placed asphalt as opposed to something that might be kind of worn down. And so that's something that we were able to do, and we emphasize to our customers is like, do this stuff, like show. All you have to do is click this section and just say, I want the top section to be fresh asphalt versus the existing, which might have wear marks or cracking. We have decals where you can put, potholes and all different things to show that. But you're right, that is another element of the communication, is like, let's show the texture. Let's show how these things change over time, and let's communicate those using these pretty simple features within Beyond Typicals. And then you can show stuff subsurface as well. Like maybe the utility has earth around it, but as part of the upgrade, we're going to put either some sort of concrete block or like maybe some sort of engineered soil or gravel. You can change that texture around the pipe to show that as well. So yeah, textures are a huge part of this. You don't have to think about when you're designing, because that's not really something that you might be thinking about it, but it's not like you apply a texture to different elements of your plans, but it actually happens. And so having that ability, having realistic textures, is just a really powerful feature to make these projects even look more dynamic within Beyond Typicals.
Yeah, and I think that became a whole nother career, right? Landscape architects, that's their whole bread and butter, is understanding textures and how they interrelate between the exterior and the interior design and architecture around it. And then, civil, I think that's one of the inherent challenges, is we're more technical in like math and science in a lot of ways. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges, that when we get to civil engineering programs, they're not really developed to go to that visualization tool. They're more technical programs. But I think that what you've done with this merges a little bit of both of those to allowing a better presentation of civil products. Which leads into another great question, which is, I think, one of the biggest challenges in any type of communication or visualization is compositing and the final presentation of that, whether that is pictures, whether that is video, whether that comes from a drone, whether that comes from a camera that's somebody's taking a picture. Explain that whole inherent challenge, and then how you're trying to fix that.
Yeah, one thing that you learn doing visualization is we can have the best artists modeling the best buildings and the best mountains in the distance, and the best sky and clouds and all of these things, but it's never going to be as realistic as if you just went outside and took a picture of it. And so photo compositing has been a staple of visualization for a very long time in architecture and transportation. And it's basically just the process of taking an image, making a 3D model, and then blending those things together. And in the past, you do those things separately, and then you would bring them into something like Photoshop, and then make sure that they're matched up, and then looking nice and blended together. And for the first while with Beyond Typicals, that's how, people were trying to use some photo compositing, but it wasn't built in. So they would render it out and then they bring it into some product and blend them together. But with version 2.4 that came out last year, we enabled users to do photo compositing right within the software. So they could bring in an image, they could build their Beyond Typicals model, and then you can camera match against the image and blend those together. And the thing that's super cool about it is historically, photo compositing has primarily been image renders. You have an image render out in the field, and I'm going to make a 3D model, and then I'm going to make the final version is going to look realistic, but it's going to be an image. But with Beyond Typicals, once you get that camera matched, you can just record the video for 30 seconds, and now you have a living, breathing, a 3D model where the buildings will look super realistic because they're the actual buildings, because it's a picture, but the cars and the people and all these things are moving. So I've been doing a series called Compositing with Sam, where whenever I travel, wherever I go, I'm always taking pictures of roads. They got to be straight, because right now you can just do straight sections, but then I composite against them. And I just show how, it may take 15 minutes for me. And granted, I do this a lot, so other people might take longer, but for maybe less than an hour, you can get a photo composite video for a PowerPoint in a way that just was never possible. So that's been super helpful for our customers, and probably one of the biggest features we've launched since the software was launched 2 years ago.
Yeah, it's inherently hard for a lot of people. I know I've had challenges in the past with this because it does take a little bit of technical know-how to go through compositing, almost video making in a way. It's borderline the basics of video making. And I always think one of the biggest challenges is lighting. Just getting the lighting right between the renderer and what you're actually seeing in real life, so that it doesn't look kind of fake in a way. I know a lot of people, they see it and they're like, well, that doesn't look exactly like it should. And it's typically due to the lighting of the composite.
Yeah, lighting is a huge part of it. And that's, within Beyond Typicals, you can adjust the time of day to get those shadows to match. We still need to do some stuff with like diffuse lighting, like cloudy scenarios or shaded scenarios are still a little tricky, but yeah, that's huge.
And, one of the things that I think going forward with compositing is taking that to a level where it is that drag and drop, which is where you're trying to get to, being able to just, like you talked about, if it's a cloudy day, choose it's cloudy, or get to the point where if you took this drone footage in this state at this time, this was what it was like. And you're starting to see that in simulators. Like Microsoft Flight Simulator does a really good job of trying to do that and bring in that real data. And I think also, potentially down the line, do you see like Google Earth or anything just to bring that reality, regardless if somebody has the data from a drone or from Google Earth or from a photo they taken?
I think that's possible. And there are a lot of tools and tricks from like the visual effects industry. Like movies use compositing all the time. I mean, that's whether you notice it or not, almost every movie these days has a lot of compositing in it. So gathering the data from the time of the picture, that would be useful. There are other things that we've talked about that we want to add too, because the hardest part, I think, is camera matching right now. I can do it quickly because I do this all the time, but for other people just starting, it's challenging. So I think the first step would be like guidelines. So you like choose the edge of the road in the image, and then it just kind of snaps the edge of the road in the 3D model to the image. That's something that we could add maybe as soon as this year. But eventually, back to AI, just being able to say, okay, I took a picture of this road. I've made a 3D model of the road. It should match edge to edge. Make it match. Set the camera up in a way where it's matching. Once that happens, compositing is just going to be just so ubiquitous, because already with Beyond Typicals, it's very easy to do. But if we removed even more friction, then there's going to be fewer and fewer reasons why you wouldn't want to use it on a project, especially if we can get to someday to the point of some curvature, some intersections. That's when AI will be really helpful, because then it's going to get even harder to do camera matching as opposed to the straight line segments that we're dealing with right now.
And do you think that we'll ever get to a point where instead of it just being, let's say, fixed footage where you take it from a drone or from the ground or photos, to more dynamic, like with a site camera? What about taking a live, camera that's actually filming a project, a construction project that's either a building or a road, and being able to overlay that beyond typicals on top of that?
Yeah, live would be challenging, but that would be cool. I think what would be harder would be camera matching with moving footage. But that, again, the VFX industry has been doing this for a long time, and those tools have gotten really good. Like tools like After Effects, they can track the camera and then match the 3D geometry to it much better than what was previously possible. And so I would love to do that someday, like where we have some of that stuff built in, where, right now I mentioned you can make a 3D render an animation, but the camera's going to be static. But like, what if the camera's moving and then it's moving the 3D model, the camera in space, in 3D space as well? All of those things are possible. It's just a matter of, is that a priority for our customers? How soon can we get to it? But yeah, I would love to have more dynamic compositing tools, because that's my preference. Like when I'm using Beyond Typicals, I'm usually thinking, how's this going to be composited? Because it's a cool aesthetic, the cutoff sections, and the floating thing that's everything's falling off into infinity. There's a place for that, but I really like the composites because it's just a much more complete picture.
Which leads me to the final question. In a perfect world and a future roadmap, what is the goal for Beyond Typical?
The best thing would be if we could just get beyond intersections, which basically means, and this may be a whole new product line, but the ability to go from these sections. We've developed a really cool paradigm of like sections, attaching assets to them, being able to move them. But could we expand that further to intersections, to driveways, intersecting roads, maybe someday even like full interchanges? That's where I want to go. If I had all the manpower in the world I say manpower, my developer is a woman and she's amazing, but that's where I would want to go, is like, let's push this further so that we can do bigger and bigger chunks of these projects, so that someday, again, starting with the easiest thing you can think of, a typical section of a project, we're just pushing more and more complex to someday, having the city in a digital twin, but hopefully maintaining that ease of use, that drag and drop nature that we've been able to, the customers have found so enjoyable with Beyond Typicals. So that's hopefully where we're going. Push Beyond Typicals forward, and then maybe even do new products that will take that same ease of use, but in more complex scenarios.
Well, thank you, Sam, for joining us on the episode of the BIM Heroes podcast.
Thank you, Cody. This has been an absolute privilege and honor, and I really am grateful for this opportunity.